I've been here for a couple of years of a web developer. And in global also, we've been working what is micro front ends. We have about some lessons and we want to share it with you. Let's start analyzing the problem that we have, or the challenge. Is something that is happening when we are developing. We have this piece of software that is growing and also need to be developed faster. So you add or increase, and then it's very hard to maintain that software piece. And also there are problems or requirements that, for example, to finish very fast or high availability of the software. And with that, there are some problems in the development area. To understand more, let's reflect about the evolution of the web development. So let's start in the 1990s when we just started in the web. It was a great invention. In those days, we had a single monolith. This single monolith, it was full integrated, what we sent to the browser, everything was in one project. And of course, it was very difficult to maintain. It had their own problems. Then years go by, and about in the middle 90s, somebody said, why don't we separate these monoliths? The back end will be working one side and the front end in the other side separately. And it was a surprise. It was a great advance. It was very easy to maintain in one side the front end and the other side the back end. Then more years passed, and we saw that in the back end area, said, well, this is becoming a problem. Our business logic is so complex that even though we are super from the front end, it's very complicated to maintain the back end. Why don't we either to only have a single monolith in the back end? Let's separate. We say, let's have microservices, each one performing one task. So the microservices started, the task simplified, and it was a success. That was happening in the back end, but in the front end, it was the opposite. So we started saying, why don't we mix everything in a just single package? SPAs, we create some bundles, etc. For example, I have a web page, about 5 pages, and just one have an error, and I need to deploy it. But because everything is in a big bundle, I cannot deploy or display that page. So I need to start again with my app. So then we need to go this big jump to 2020 because this started a single year, a couple of years ago. But in 2020, we said, why instead of having just one package for front end, let's separate in small packages. And from there, we have this question. As microservices had the evolution, let's do it in the front end. If we try to have like a hard definition of what is micro front-end architecture, it's an approach to develop web application as a composition of small front-end apps representing a. And what is important is every app represents a business subdomain. That's the key point in order to success. basically is we're not going to divide. What we're seeing in the slide is in my Facebook page. And some years ago, I think 2010, they published an article and they propose something similar of micro front end. We can say that in that point, the term was for everybody, but it was not micro front end, but pagelet. And basically is to divide in section. So Facebook had different sections and work by different teams, and they saw a better performance and some advantages. But let's analyze the Facebook interface. Here we have the search box, the menu in the up in the another section to create a publication, and then the histories got into a trend, and they just added in this area. Then news section, chat, and advertising area. So in just one page, we have a lot of different functionalities, but every one of it is isolated or is independent. So let's see how this works. If you realize when we click in any of these elements, we are using just that element and the others remains the same. And what I mean is I'm writing a public section and the other things in news and other parts are not moved. Each section is independent of the other. Let's go to a more interest detail for us. How we can see this, but in the code. So with the Chrome tools, we'll see something like this. How do they look to the browser? So for example, in the publication area, we are going to see that they have this page-led composer. What they did, it was to create this small app specialized in Facebook publication, not show it, just create it. And it's the same in the stories. Stories is a particular case because they have an integration with Instagram. In this case, in the rear area, they have this communication channel or to histories in the same Facebook platform, and they use those data and it's a page-led independent. So this is like the first term to page-led and is similar what we know now as a micro front end. And at the end of the day, it's a separate app. So let's put attention in this code. You can see that there's nothing like impressive. It's a div, and that's a component implementation. And yes, it is. We are not reinventing. We are using technologies that existed for a long time ago. We can use also with divs or even though with live streams. The key for this technique, let's think that is a rack where you place an app in each slot. So we can connect or disconnect pieces to our website, and our website need to support it through steps maybe. With no repercussions. Let's remember a key factor is imagine this in a way that each micro front ends represent a business subdomain and must be isolated from the others. So now let's see something more interesting, which is a demo, how all this works. But before, I would like to highlight, there's no strict or definitive technique of how to apply a micro front end. What we are doing is like a philosophy, how we are developing this. Currently, there are some frameworks that help us in this stack, but not necessarily we need to implement them. Just follow the idea that each section of subdomain of my business is separated and isolated from the rest. In this case, the demo that we're going to see is a small app pending or something to do. And let's think the development team already analyzed it, and we are going to divide it in 3 areas. The first one is editor. Editor is where the user is going to write down the task. The second one is the list. Everything that is written and saved. And the third one is the rack that I already mentioned. This app that will contain the others and maintain the connection, all like the wires between them. Just 1 second. So let's start and review this rack that I mentioned. All this code is in GitHub. If you want to review it at the end of the presentation, you will have the link. But basically, the first part that I want to check out is lines 18 and 19. We are using iframe. Some years ago, I've noticed that people doesn't like to use iframe. But here, okay, let's do it. And because it's the simple way to embed one app with the other, and it's in a standard. All the browsers are there. It's included in all the browsers, so why not use it? Again, this depends of your current development. Maybe it's not so good, so you need to change this technique. But for demo, this is enough. HTML is pretty simple. Just 2 iframes. One is editor and the other one is list. Now we are seeing editor code. And we can see it's pretty much complex, the HTML. We have 2 fields and 2 bottoms. One for the description, one from save, and another for clear to clear the note. So continue with our assumptions. Let's say that this small app was developed by a team. They have their own practices and code. This team said, let's do this small app, taking into account 3 things or 3 objects. The first one is to be used as APA public. And through this object, it will be connected to my app. The second, we're going to handle all the business logic. And number 3, to wire the UI to the business object. And very fast, I'm going to show you this reference when you see the code. Here is perfectly mentioned each and every one of these 3 objects. Let's remember. The idea is an object, and will be used as a public API. Next application or micro front end is list. HTML is very easy. We have a body with an extra element, and that's it. But the thing is that everything is in JavaScript, adding those elements. And again, it's a separate team, and decided that, or the simpler way was to create functions that will handle all these, and we will have a list that we need to notify every time an alteration appears. If we review both micro apps, they have the object or a way to control and are different, but they are not ones against the other, because we can say there are two different APIs. Going back to our container or frame, it's not enough just to have this iframe. We need to wire. And this is as any element of our rack that we built. It's not enough to put the server in its place. We need to wire the server. And this happens here. If you notice, we call the functions in the other mini application, all this wiring, and then it works. Let's see how this works. Okay. This is the app that we are developing. And it's working. So until now, these two apps are working okay. But what is the advantage of this technique? Let's suppose that we deploy this to production, and then they say to us, you know what? There is a bug that is in production. The list of tasks is red when the mouse is hovering. But we need to develop, but we don't want to have problems with the server. Just it's a very tiny bug, and we need just to deploy it. And so what we can do there is, well, I'm not going to go to the trash my entire app. I can go here to my code CCS. This is the code in the list. You review, find the bug. Oh yes, of course, this property was wrong. I delete it and deploy it again. Let's review it. And right now I change it in box.ca, not deployed. So for show you, I did this script to deploy separate application in this demo. In real world, it can be a container, a virtual machine, whatever. Depends on of your infrastructure or your app. But this is not it's not against the concept. So I can tell if this is gulp, deploy list. And this will deploy just this small part of the list. We can see it here, only deployed list. We come back to our demo, we reload the page, and that's it. We repair the bug. Also, we can have stronger errors. Let's do one. For example, in the list, somebody made a mistake and erase a part of the HTML, so the app will stop working. And again, we deployed this part. And what we see, and of course, all these parties without this with color, and it's an iframe, it's connected, but the rest is working. And we can say, okay, I find out the bug, I solve it, and that's it. Basically, the idea is let's separate this, or let's imagine that they are an independent app. This is not new. It's just the perspective of how we are going to develop this app as separate ones. The other day, somebody told me, well, at the end of the day, it's an approximation of components. Yes, in a way or the other, it is. But we need to take into account. Imagine your component as a separate app. I can send to production that only component, and that's the key point, or the great lesson that we learn working in Globant. So the value of working of micro frontend is the flexibility to deploy fraction or areas, because there are some times when we have some problems in production and we just need to deploy a very tiny part of the app. And this is very useful. And there's a lot of flexibility when we manipulate these apps. Sometimes the client says, oh, you know what, this will be developed in this way with this architecture, but at the last minute I realized that no, I don't need it like that. I need to change it, and very fast, because I have a due limit time. So this separation, it's also help us to isolate problems, and also is very important, this flexibility. Let's go back to the presentation. And working in this way is not a definitive solution. We have to balance things. I gain one thing, I can lose other. We need to analyze if it's correct for what my type of project. So the things, these trade-offs, what I gain is organizational flexibility, a lot of flexibility how we can organize in our projects. Also, we increase scalability and deployability. We will reduce. We will have a lot of flexibility in how we deploy things. And another point that I love, in some way, there are devs news. So if it's a very big project, always is a problem, because they don't, the new ones, they don't know the code base. So the time that this learning time is very long, or not as easy as we want. So working in this way is much better because the sections that the new developer must focus are smaller. She or he didn't know the entire code. This is on the one side, but on the other side, well, increased complexity. And why? Because we need to know the version of each microphone deploying. For example, version 1 of our editor app needs of the functionalities of the list element that were added in list number 2. So we need to know all this. So complexity increase when we deploy. The second thing, increase bundle sizes and data transfer. Let's remind, because they are separate apps, each one had the same dependencies, their own resources. So that's why this the data transfer increase. So we need to watch out that point. And the third one is very delicate. We need to emphasize on integration test. Different app is not only to test the app, but the several apps, and all the apps get along together one to the other. And if right now somebody tells me, when should I use this technique or to have this micro front end focus, I will take into account these two aspects. First of one, how simple or diverse is the business? Maybe it's as simple as if I start to implement the micro front end because it's a new trend, maybe I'm complicating myself. So a simple business, for example, a calculator. I can say, well, maybe with two apps one will be like the screen and the second one, the bottoms. And in that scenario, it is really useful beyond educational purposes. But if a diverse business is example, e-commerce, for example, somebody can tell me, well, a business at the end of the day is sales. Yes, it's right. But on one side is the business area of showing the product, and all there is the to have the transaction, the sales. And I can develop each area and separately. And the third one is the cart section with the communication channels and at the end, unify as a big and an entire application. And the other aspect that I take into account is when there's a chance to need a fragmented release. What I mean is what I just mentioned. If there is a possibility that, for example, tell us we need to deploy this tiny part, or we want to add this new functionality, but just in this area, not affecting the rest of it. So if there is a chance of this, the micro front end will be a very good solution. And this is what I prepared to share with you. And here you have the link of the GitHub where you can download the code of the demo. The QR is the same. My social media, my website, and you will have all the information with this.